Welcome back, students. The last saw that we are going to include in our series of safety videos regarding the different types of saws in our shop is the table saw, okay? And this particular saw scares a lot of students. There's nothing to be scared of. It's a great saw. You can do a lot of things with it, and you just have to understand exactly how the saw works, what all the different features are, and go from there. So you have nothing to fear. We have a very safe table saw. We have a automatically stopping feature known as a saw stop. It's basically just a very fancy brake that clamps onto the blade and prevents anybody's fingers from getting cut or anything like that. So I'll save that for another video, but we have some safety devices built into our table that make it safe, but that doesn't excuse you from being safe. You still have to do all the right things, okay? Including paying close attention to what you're doing at all times on this particular saw. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the different parts of the saw. So you can see here, all right, this is our guard. Okay, it is not on permanently right now. I have it just kind of set in place. So this is a guard, right? That's a guard. As you move, if I remove the guard, you could see we have our blade right here. There's our blade. Right here in my left hand, this is a miter gauge. So what you can do is you can adjust angles on this and actually use this to make some cross cuts for long boards. There's another channel here on this side where I could actually take this miter gauge and put it on this side if I wanted to, and I could do that as well. Okay, so we have a miter gauge and we have the channels for the miter gauge. This big white thing right here that you could see is our fence. So it locks. You slide this thing over. You can set your depth, or excuse me, you can set your distance from the blade. So that's why we have a long metal rule right here. Let's say I just needed, say, I don't know, 6 inches. I would just, while this is obviously stopped, I would just slide this over. Make sure that I have 6 inches to this side of the blade, depending on where you want. Don't forget, a blade is an 1/8 inch, so you would have here, I'd lock it in place, so there's this nice little lock right there. Or, if I trust, I could just use down here, there's actually a rule or a tape measure that allows me to slide this all the way over. So this actually can slide, it's hard to tell from here, but this can slide all the way down the table for a real big piece if it's really long or something like that, and we gotta make a cross cut on a long board. If it's a board that's 12 inches wide or less, we would take that to the miter saw and do that cut, but if it was a big piece of, maybe like a piece of plywood, we might wanna use our table saw for that. So yeah, we have our fence, we have our miter gauge, here's the blade. This piece right here, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the camera. This piece right here, or this part right here, this is what's called the riving knife. Okay, and we wanna, here in a little bit I'll explain the purpose of the riving knife, but this never comes off. In fact, our guards should never be off either. We should always have our guards. I'm gonna bring the camera down around here, show you some of the mechanisms. You could use this to actually adjust the height of the blade. So you would unlock it, and as you can see, as I'm turning it, that blade is going up and down. And then I'll go ahead and lock it back. It's back at 0. And then over here, you could change the angle of the blade. So that knob or that wheel right there will actually change that blade, and we could turn it over for making a beveled cut. Right here is our on and off. So it's important to know that because this has a computer inside of it, this particular piece right here has to be on. You turn it on, notice that it's flashing red. You have to wait. This is the computer kind of starting up, just like you have your Chromebooks or your MacBooks or whatever, your laptops at home. You have to give them a minute to start up. This flashing red light will eventually stop. There it goes, it just stopped. It's now green and we're ready to use it. As you can see, it says right here, you pull to start it, and then you push to stop it. It's kind of nice because it's a big paddle. So if I had to, I could use like my knee. If I had 2 hands on my material up here, if I had 2 hands like this, I could use my knee to turn it off. So I would pull it out to turn it on. And as I'm working through, and I have to hold that material and I cut it, I can just use my knee to just turn it off right away and then wait for that blade to come to a full and complete stop. So our table saw has a lot of different options. I mean, we could actually change the blade out, and we could put in a stack of blades called a dado stack and cut grooves into wood. You can actually take this miter gauge and you could turn it on an angle like this. I can adjust it, set my wood here, slide it in, and I could make a mitered cut on that. I could adjust the blade to make a beveled cut. So there's a few different things that you can do on this. But for this particular video, we're just gonna demonstrate the two main cuts that are used on the table saw. The first cut that is used most frequently is a rip cut. So we have this board. This is about an 18-inch board right here. And we wanna say, we just wanna cut off, I don't know, we'll go ahead and say we're gonna try to cut off a few inches, just like that, all right? And I just wanna take that whole piece off right there. So it's a little bit too wide. I want to thin it out. So this is a rip cut once again because we're ripping along with the grain or parallel to the grains. So what I would do, I have my fence here. Obviously the blade is not running. You can tell by seeing, and you don't hear it running. But I want to, in this case, I would have it already measured and marked. So I measured my distance, I marked it. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and slide my fence, set my material up against the fence, and then I'll slide the fence, push that mark up to the blade, and it may be difficult for you to see, but what I have is I have the mark on this side of the blade, because a blade is 1/8 inches thick. So if I were to put the blade right on my mark, I'm gonna be cutting a 1/16 of an inch into my material, which I don't want to do. Okay, if I'm cutting this part off right here, so I want exactly from this corner to this mark right here, I want that exact, then I need to make sure that my blade is cutting on the waist side of that line. So I give myself this, or set this up in this way. I go ahead and lock it in place. Now, before I go on any further, one of the things you have to know is we have two different tools that we could use to help push this through. So the way we would do this is we feed this through, just like we talked about like with the bandsaw, you feed it through. Now, my hands are moving closer to that blade, closer and closer. This is that line of cut, just like with the bandsaw. There's a line of cut right at the front of the blade, and we wanna avoid moving our hands at any point. We don't wanna move our hands past that line of cut for a few obvious reasons. One, you could notice that as I get past this, now I start to hang over that blade, and I don't ever want to be in this position, okay? So I don't want to hang over the blade. Also, I don't want my hands past it, because if anything happens, if that board kicks, it could throw my hands across the blade. There's plenty of horror stories and crazy videos out there of people who get their material, they push it past, that material hits the riving knife and catches that blade and actually throws them back. So we want to avoid putting our hands past the line of cut at all times, never. So what do we do if we have this long board like this and we need it to go all the way past? What do? I can't stop, I can't take my hands off it. So we have some tools. We make these ourselves, but they have fancy ones that you could buy. This is a rabbet, right? And it has a little lip right there you can kind of see. And the way the rabbet works is we go ahead and we hook it on our material, and we slide it through like this. And you can tell that not only am I still behind the line of cut, but as it finishes the cut, I can move past and then take my hand off. My hand is above that blade, okay? I prefer our push stick like this. I like the push sticks because you get the same hook, you get it on there, you feed it in this manner, and then as you get closer to that line of cut, you can take your hand off. And now you're back in this position, your hands are not near the blade, and you could finish by pushing it all the way through. So I prefer these long handled push sticks over the rabbet. Now, the other cut is a cross cut. So if we were gonna make a cross cut, we could do it one of two ways. We could use the fence like we did in the last one. So push it up against the fence and then feed it in this way. Notice up here, I would end up having to feed like this with both hands because it's pretty wide. So instead of using my hand, I'm gonna use the miter gauge, and I could push this together, right? I can control that, and I can push that together just like that. As it finishes the cut, I just push with the long stick handle or the long push stick and move that material all the way through. Okay, so we're all set up to make this long rip cut. I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate how I would do this. One of the things that you wanna make sure of is you're not gonna start with the push stick from way back here. You don't have any control with doing that. You're gonna use your hands to control it. You need to have some force down against the table, and then you also wanna make sure that you are pushing up against the fence. So again, the fence needs to be locked in place, so it's already locked in place. It's up against it, so I'm gonna push it against the fence, and this is gonna help give me that nice straight cut. I'm gonna have downward pressure. I'm gonna feed through. Now, I have my push stick sitting right here, so it's ready. So as soon as I'm ready to get to my push stick, I can take that right hand off, I can grab the push stick, and then I can finish the cut, feeding, and eventually, as my hand gets closer to that line of cut, I could take this hand off, and I could push it all the way through. So we're gonna go ahead and demonstrate that now. Okay, so that's gonna be a rip cut. As you can see, I just took off that little piece that we're wanting to take off. It's nice and straight because I was able to use that fence. I kept my hands away. From that blade. As you saw, I got to about this point here. I was able to then move to the push stick, finish it, cut it all the way through. My hand is still behind that line of cut. I turned it off, and I even used this to just kind of push that away a little bit. Typically we want to wait and make sure that this has come to a complete stop before we move anything. So you notice I didn't move until the blade had stopped. We don't reach for this while it's still spinning. We don't reach for this one while it's still spinning. Okay, so one of the other things that I wanted to mention on the rip cut before we move over to the cross cut is you'll notice that I cut off the waist side over here and I kept my big side over here. This is the side that I was going to be pushing, okay? You want to push in between the fence and the blade, because if we were to do it the other way, if we were to push like this, what's going to happen is that scrap piece is going to be pinched or sandwiched in between the fence and the blade. So we want to always be pushing between the fence and the blade. That way the material that cuts off is over here. If we do it the opposite, if we push on this side and we push this all the way through, what happens is the scrap piece, if this is our scrap piece, that scrap piece now gets sandwiched in between here, and this can get thrown back, which is pretty dangerous. So keep that in mind, because now we're going to go to the cross cut like this. If I set it up, and this is what students do a lot, they go, oh, I just need to make a cross cut. I'm just going to set it right here, and I'm going to push like this. Well, once we start pushing like this, as I finish the cut, that waist piece is now jammed up in between here, and we want to avoid that. There is a setup that will allow us to use the miter gauge and cut like this with a fence. There is a setup, but it's a special setup where we set up a spacing block here, and that way when it finishes the cut, there's more room on this end. So I'm not gonna go over that in this video right now. So there is a way to do it, but we wanna make sure that we are pushing in between here, and the waist piece or the cutoff piece is out here on its own, so it doesn't get stuck here. We wanna push this material all the way through. So if I was to do this cross cut like this, this would not be correct, because I have that piece that's gonna cut get sandwiched in between. So for a particular cross cut like this one, let's say I wanted to make this cut right here, and let's go like that's about 8 inches. So I'll say I want to mark this, and there's about, actually I was wrong, it's about 6.5 inches. So we'll go like this. We'll say that this is 6. That's what I wanted to cut. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that I instead go ahead and cut in this manner. Okay, so I'm gonna find out, there's my 6-inch mark. It was about right here. Mark it on this side now. So I flip my board over. We'll go ahead and mark it on that side. Now I can move this and set it up this way. Now it's the same thing that I just did on the rip cut, except this time now, all my space, I have a lot more space over here. It's gonna fall apart there. The scrap piece is gonna come out over here. I could grab my push stick, or in this case, I'm far enough away from the rabbet or the blade that I could use the rabbet, and I could make that cut like that and push it all the way through, turn it off, and this waste piece is over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate that right now. So that's gonna wrap up the first video of our table saw. We have another video we're gonna put out a little bit later that goes over some more of the advanced techniques that we could use. Our table saw is incredibly versatile and there's so many things that we could do. But for this first video, we wanted to talk about the basics. We want to talk about the basic parts of a table saw, the basic safety measures that we have in place, how to make the most common cuts. The two most common cuts on a table saw are going to be our rip cuts and our cross cuts. So we just want to make sure everybody understood how to do those. But before we go for today, I want to make sure that we have in place a checklist that we know of and we pay attention to when we come to the table saw. It's a great tool. There's a lot that can be done, but a lot of people get themselves into a position that they have to turn off in the middle of a cut because they didn't think things out. So one of the first things you should do, but anytime you use the table saw, is have your cut planned out on your board. So what is it that you're doing? Are you cutting off an 1/8 inch, 3/4 of an inch, 2 inches? Know what you're cutting and have that marked so you know exactly what you're cutting, and then mark the waste side. That's true of all of our cuts with any saw. Always mark your material and then say, this is the waste. This is the side that I want removed away from my project, okay? The next thing you want to do is, as you come up to the table saw, you want to listen to see if the vacuum is running. So our vacuum system is hooked up to our table saw. It was not running while I've been doing this video because it's really difficult to hear in the video. So I didn't have the vacuum running. You need to make sure that the vacuum is running at all times when you use this so that the dust is pulling through and sucked up. The next thing you want to do is you walk up to the table, your board is marked, you listen, the vacuum's running, is you look and see if it's actually turned on. So we have, as I showed you earlier in the video, we have a green light and a red light. If you see a solid green, then it's ready to be used. If it has a flashing red, then it's not ready to be used. A flashing green means it's not ready to use either. So there's an on-off switch on that you can use. If anything other than solid green is showing, then you would just need to notify me and we could figure this out. The other things you want to be sure of is that you have the depth set properly for your wood. So it's very similar to the circular saw. We want to make sure that a single tooth, a whole tooth, is showing basically. So 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch is the proper depth that the blade should stick up through the material when you cut it. Just like on the circular saw, you set the plate to where the blade slides down, and the blade is anywhere from like 1/4 to 1/2 an inch through the apex of the material. So you would come up to the saw here, you would set your material down next to the blade, you would look at it, you would go, okay, the blade is in the right place. I could see one whole tooth and maybe the tops of another 2 of them were all good to cut there. So I walked up, I listened for the vacuum, I have my board marked, I checked to make sure the depth is the proper height. I shouldn't have to put my glasses on because they should already be on, but we need to make sure that our glasses are on. And then before I get ready and actually make the cut, I'm gonna set the table up, I'm gonna slide the fence. If I'm using the miter gauge, I'm gonna get that set up. All of this while the blade is off. So I get everything prepared. Okay, this is the cut I wanna make. I have the fence slid over into the proper spot. Everything is exactly as I want it to be cut. And before I turn this on, I'm gonna make sure that the tools that I need are sitting right here. So, all right, maybe I need that push stick, maybe I need that rabbet. I want them to be right here. I don't want them to be out over there or out over there. I don't wanna have to reach for them. I need to double check. And I've seen students do this far too many times. I'll be across the room and I see them starting their cut and then they're looking around and they turn it off and I come over here and go, what happened? Oh, I didn't have the push stick by me. Okay, so I'm glad that they turned it off and they didn't try to just do it without it. A lot of times students will put themselves in a bad position where they realize they don't have the tool next to them while they're cutting. So they begin cutting and oh, I don't have the rabbet, I don't have the push stick, I'll just do it with my hands. It's not what we want. We want to make sure we use those tools because that's what they're there for. All right, so again, the checklist is I walk up, my board is marked, I listen for the vacuum's on, I make sure the blade is obviously off, I check the depth of the blade in my material, I get all my stuff set up, I arrange the fence, whatever it is I needed to do to where that cut is going to be on the waist side of my material. I have my push stick or my rabbet right there ready to go, my glasses are on, and now I'm actually ready to turn it on and proceed with that cut. So I hope you can remember that checklist. It sounds like a lot, but eventually as you use this tool more and more, you'll get more familiar. You'll be a little more comfortable. You'll remember all these things, like all the vacuum needs to be turned on, and you'll go and do that stuff. So thank you guys for watching. Let's get that quiz done and be ready when we come back a little bit later next week to review some of the saws and prepare ourselves for that safety exam.